good evening. I'm Gary Eichten. Welcome back to the Fitzgerald Theater for the final DFL Gubernatorial Debate. Tuesday is primary election day in Minnesota, with voters deciding which candidates will represent each of the three major political parties in the November general election. All three parties, Republican, Independents, and DFL, have contests for governor on Tuesday, but by far the DFL contest has generated the most interest, what with three well-known, high-profile candidates on the ballot. Tonight, all three have joined us on stage to try to convince you that they would be the best DFL candidate for governor. Of course, over the years, these final debates have become a wonderful tradition here at Minnesota Public Radio, and we're so happy we're able to do it again this year. I want to thank all of you here at the Fitzgerald Theater for coming out tonight, and all of you listening on the radio or the web for tuning in this evening. And we're issuing a Twitter alert. NPR News political reporter Tom Scheck is live tweeting our debate, so you can follow along on Twitter at NPR Politics. Now, format for the debate, really pretty casual. I'll have some questions for the candidates. The candidates have a chance to question each other a little bit. We'll also be taking questions from those of you here in the audience. If you have a question, just raise your hand, and our mic handlers, Curtis Gilbert, Molly Bloom, Nancy Liebens, will get a microphone to you. We've asked the candidates to keep their comments, their responses relatively short and to the point. And so we're going to ask you folks to do the same. If you ask a question, please keep it short and to the point, and please be polite. Now, here's your chance to cheer for your candidate. Before we get started, let me introduce the candidates in alphabetical order. First up, former U.S. Senator Mark Dayton. All right. Far end of the table, former Minnesota House Minority Leader Matt Entenza.
Okay.
All right, and in the middle, Minnesota House Speaker Margaret Anderson Kelliher. Okay, let's get to it, and we might as well start right at the bottom line here. You talk to DFLers, and they say, "Gosh, kind of like all the candidates. I guess I'd be happy with any one of the three." But these folks have to make a decision on Tuesday. They're going to have to pick one of you, and why should they pick you as opposed to the other two? Mark Dayton.
Well, you're right, Gary. We have three excellent choices for DFL voters, and I think the difference is that I will raise the most revenues by making the richest Minnesotans pay their fair share of taxes. And, right now our taxes in Minnesota are steeply regressive. As has been pointed out by myself primarily in this campaign, back under Governor Arne Carlson, our taxes were fairly evenly distributed in Minnesota, state and local taxes. And now, after two Republican governors and a wrestler turned libertarian, we have taxes that are steeply regressive. And the richest Minnesotans, especially people making over $1 million a year, they are only paying 2/3 of the percent of their income in state and local taxes that everybody else is paying. So I'm going to raise revenues more than anybody else. And for every dollar of revenue you don't raise by raising taxes on the richest Minnesotans, a dollar of funding for education or healthcare or human services is going to have to be cut. And that's the fundamental difference, and that's the fundamental difference in the direction in which I'll lead Minnesota.
Margaret Anderson Kelliher, why should people pick you on Tuesday?
Well, thank you to NPR for having us here tonight. It's terrific to be here with you. I think it's really much more fundamental than that, and that's a leadership style. That's a bringing people together. And I have been in the arena. It has been a tough 4 years in the state of Minnesota, but I have stayed in the arena. I don't quit. I don't back down. What Minnesotans can count on is I'm going to bring people together time and time again, just like I did on the transportation override, when we overrode Governor Pawlenty and took on Tom Emmer, when we were able to pass a nation-leading renewable energy standard bipartisanly, and we were able to put out to the voters the Legacy Amendment. It's about bringing people together. We all agree that millionaires must pay more in the state of Minnesota. Taxes have become regressive. All of our plans do that. The difference is the definition of who's wealthy. You are not wealthy if you're a police officer married to a nurse in the state state of Minnesota in my book. You are middle class. And so we need a balanced approach. We need a jobs budget that's going to get this economy moving again. I have the best plan for that, and I have the best leadership style. Look at the Star Tribune endorsement. They said Kelliher offers a different style of leadership than Minnesota has seen in the governor's office in many years. She's a collaborator. That's exactly what I'll do. I'll bring Minnesotans together.
Matt Entenza, why should people pick you on Tuesday?
Well, Gary, I'm going to use the Emmer word. And you know what? Tom Emmer believes that we can cut our way to greatness. And I think in this room we know you cannot cut your way to greatness. That is a recipe that means that Minnesota schools will continue to go backwards. We're historically the best schools in the country. Now we're middle of the pack and we're falling backwards. Our University of Minnesota has been tarnished, and Tom Emmer would hurt higher education. We need a governor who understands, however, that we can't merely tax our way to greatness. I wish it were that easy, but we can't afford to have the highest tax rate in the country, maybe times a factor of 2 or 3. We can't go there. We need a balanced approach. I will make sure that we have a governor who helps to grow our way to greatness. That means creating jobs in a focused approach, and I believe that clean energy is the best way there. When we pay ourselves for our energy, instead of exporting it to dictators in the Middle East and getting involved in ridiculous foreign wars, we should be building wind turbines here, we should be owning them locally, and creating jobs here. And in education, we must scrap No Child Left Behind. It has been a disaster for our schools, a terrible thing for Minnesota education, and we need to tell Washington, D.C. with Bush's last legacy that we're not going to let that stand. We're going to teach to our own high standards as opposed to dumbing our standards down.
Mark Dayton, why is your tax plan better than the tax plan that Matt Entenza, Margaret Anderson Kelliher are proposing? It seems like, looking at it on a chart, everybody agrees that after $250,000 and above, taxes would go up. It's the argument about people below that. Why is your approach better than what they're talking about?
Well, it surprises me to be criticized by fellow Democrats for asking the richest Minnesotans to pay their fair share of taxes. You know, as my friend and colleague Paul Wellstone used to say, the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party had one of its fundamental principles, progressive taxes. And the plan that my two DFL friends here were proposing would not make taxes, even the flat tax in Minnesota, certainly not progressive. They'd leave taxes still strongly regressive. You know, Speaker Kelliher refers to a police officer and a nurse. So the average police officer's salary in Minnesota is about $51,000 a year. The average nurse, about $73,000. The combined income there is $124,000. I'm proposing to not raise taxes on income except above taxable income above $150,000. That's a total income of $173,000. So $124,000 isn't even close to where I'm proposing to begin to raise taxes. And the flip side of that is I would ask my two friends here, why is it you believe that somebody who's making $240,000 a year should not pay a single dollar more so that we can alleviate overcrowded classrooms and provide school 5 days a week and the other things that otherwise are going to have to be sacrificed with the budget cuts that are going to be necessary?
Margaret Anderson Kelliher, why shouldn't that person making $240,000 put a little more in the kitty?
Well, I think they've been putting more in the kitty, Gary. In this time of recession, this time of great recession, I think Minnesotans have been paying more. They've paid more than $3 billion more in property taxes over the last number of years with Governor Pawlenty's leadership and Tom Emmer's leadership, and there would be more of the same under that. You know, we need to close the corporate loopholes in this state. We need to make sure that taxes are paid fairly, and I don't think that we can go to be the highest tax rate in the country. And that's exactly what we would do under Senator Dayton's plan. We'd be higher than Hawaii. And I don't think that in a time of recession is a good idea. I think what we need is a balanced approach. We know, families sitting around the table know that there needs to be changes in how costs are being accounted for at the state level. That's why I favor a balanced approach, balance between revenue, cuts and savings, and one-time measures to be able to balance this budget. We didn't get here overnight. Everybody knows that out there. We got here over 12 years. And so to do it all in 2 years is going to be a difficult thing. And I've looked at what happens, Gary, if we do it all in 2 years. There are cuts to nursing homes. And I have not done that as Speaker of the House, and I will not do it as governor. There have been cuts all across the boards in different places that would have to happen if that were the case. And furthermore, I just think that when you're talking about reality here, you need to work in the art of the possible. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think becoming the highest tax state in the country is going to work.
Matt Entenza, what do you see wrong with Senator Dayton's approach to taxes?
Well, I have tremendous sympathy with what Mark's trying to do. The reality is our taxes are regressive. When times were really good, there were tax breaks that were cut for across the board. When times are difficult now, those who are of high income must pay their fair share. The difference we have is I would put us back at the rates we were at in 1998 when we did have substantial cuts in income for those families that are making more than $250,000. No one can argue that in 1998 the economy wasn't going well, that Minnesota wasn't going well, and I think at that point you don't have that business argument. I do think, let's face it, we are a state that is far away from a lot of markets. If we put our taxes to a rate that's substantially above any other state, we're putting ourselves in a position where we're not going to be able to succeed well. I wish we could, because that's an easier answer than suggesting we have to make cuts or defer spending. But I put out a comprehensive plan, a plan that is not going to hurt education, is not going to hurt our delivery of health and human services, but can balance the budget. But the key thing is you have to have a strategy to grow. And the clean energy economy and high tech, helping the U, which has been one of our best job creators in our Minsky system, that's what we have to do, because when we grow the economy, then we can talk about making sure that we're really taking care of things in the future and investing back in Minnesotans again.
I have a feeling we're going to circle back to this tax discussion through the hour, but let's get to some or audience questions as well. Curtis Gilbert.
Yes, Gary, I'm here with Jamal. He's from Rosemont, and he's a Kelliher supporter, but he's got a question for all the candidates.
Yes, I do support Kelliher, but this question is for all three candidates. And it is enormously important to me as a father of three girls, all under the age of 6, and it is early childhood education. Recently, Art Rolnack, the local Federal Reserve banker, put a proposal together that indicates the investment on early childhood, the return on investment is 8-to-1 ratio. So I would like to know from all three of you what specific proposals that you are going to put forward besides the general approach of scrapping No Child Left Behind.
All right, let's start with Margaret Anderson Kelliher.
Well, I think this is one of the most important questions, because when you look at creating jobs in the state of Minnesota, you need to make sure that we have the best world-class educated workforce, Gary. And educating our littlest learners, investing in early childhood is going to be one of my top priorities. I'm going to work with the legislature. What refreshing words are those after the last 8 years? To find the way to make sure that we are making that investment in our littlest learners. Now, I think there are three things to this. Being able to invest, getting that 8-to-1 return, it lowers our costs later on for kids. It makes sure that those kids have what they need. You know, right now, as a mom with kids in public school, I think it's a shame that kids come to kindergarten only 50% ready. We need to have that be 100% ready. The second thing is funding that's fair, equitable, and stable in the K-12 schools. And you know, as a public school mom, I'm the only one that has a firm commitment to make sure that happens in the first budget and over the next 6 years. And then finally, a reinvestment in higher education as a jobs engine.
Matt Entenza.
Without a doubt, that's the direction that we have to go. And I know that because, of course, I was a criminal prosecutor for Hennepin County and an assistant attorney general. I know what it's like to put people in jail, and one of the best ways we can make sure that we're not putting people in jail is to make sure that they are welcome in society, that they know that they're getting those educational opportunities, and that starts when they're young. People who have a sense of ownership, a sense that they have possibilities, are not going to turn into a different sort of person, a person who chooses the poor choices, the choices of crime and things like that. Now, we have to be careful, though, about what we do. If we're going to promise that we're going to fully fund something right away, we better come up with the money to do it. And that's why in my plan I've said we'd balance the budget without hurting education. My track record, Gary, in 2005, when Tim Pawlenty wanted to freeze and cut many areas of education, is Dean Johnson, the Senate leader, and I, as the House DFL leader, took him on, and we prevailed. He forced a government shutdown, but we prevailed, and we made sure that his proposals that would have cut back early childhood education, the Head Start, didn't pass. And under my plan, as we grow the economy, that's one of the first things we need to do, besides the universities and besides K-12, is to make sure, because it's our best long-term investment, that we're helping our youngest people.
Mark Dayton.
Certainly a basic difference between the three of us and Governor Pawlenty and Tom Emmer is that Governor Pawlenty vetoed a bonding bill in the last session of the parts that would have funded improvements in early childhood education centers. Those would have put people to work in the building trades as well as upgrade those facilities. Just the wrong way to go for Minnesota. You know, I volunteered in the Head Start program my senior year in college, and it was known back then that early childhood education had made a tremendous difference, especially for at-risk children. Yet today in this country, less than half of the children that are eligible for Head Start are able to take part. In Minnesota, it's less than 1/3. Governor Pawlenty's cut funding for early childhood education. I'll increase that funding. I'll make sure that every child comes to kindergarten ready to learn, and I'll provide state funding for all-day kindergarten. We're one of relatively few states that doesn't do that. Once again, our budget is about values and priorities as well as it is about dollars and cents, and we share that value among us here. Governor Plenty and unfortunately Representative Emmer simply do not.
Molly Bloom.
Hi, I'm here with Dan from St. Paul.
Hi, my question is for all the candidates. The Minnesota Vikings have been demanding a new stadium built with taxpayer dollars. Independence Party candidate Tom Horner has said he would pay for a new stadium with 60% taxpayer dollars and 40% from the Vikings. If you were elected governor, how would you deal with the Vikings' demand? Would you build a stadium with taxpayer dollars? If so, what percentage? And what are your thoughts about funding the stadium with personal seat licenses?
Matt Entenza.
Well, I've just been pleased that a 40-year-old guy can play quarterback. And we'll see if Brett Favre comes back, but that's given me rejuvenation, new energy. You know, I voted against the first 3 deals that the Twins put forward because they wanted a lot of general fund money that would have traded off against education and health care and other priorities that, bluntly, I believe are more important. And at the end of the day, I was part of crafting a proposal that I think worked for the Twins, a proposal that did not take money away from other key proposals. So my top priority is to sensibly and responsibly balance the budget without hurting kids and seniors and other folks, and the Vikings is not our highest priority. We have to get our house in order, and we have to make sure that we're taking care of priorities to grow the economy. But at the end of the day, I do believe, in the same way I supported the Guthrie and its expansion, and expansion of arts and other areas, that the Vikings is an asset to our state. And building a stadium certainly creates a lot of jobs, and at the end of the day is part of what we want to have to be a major league environment. But we can't do it with our general revenue, so we need to be creative. The other thing we have to be creative with is an owner who's a billionaire for a reason because he has spent other people's money to get some of the things he wants. And we have to share in the upsides. We have to have commitments that the team will stay here for a long amount of time. But I believe that we can get a job done in a responsible way, the same way we did with the Twins.
Mark Dayton.
I certainly do not support building a stadium, $970 million of taxpayers' money, and turning that over to the Vikings. But I learned when I was Commissioner of Economic Development for Minnesota twice that I would look at any major economic development project from the standpoint of whether it's a good deal or a bad deal for the people of Minnesota. It's a good deal if the benefits to the state, the tax revenues from the 8,000 people who would be working to build that stadium over 3 years, the tax revenues paid by the vendors involved in the construction of that facility, the revenues paid by those who are providing services and goods at the stadium itself once it's operating. If all those economic benefits to the state exceed the public costs, then it's a good deal and I'd support it. If it's not, then it's a bad deal and I would not support it. We'll make that decision based on whether it's good for the people of Minnesota.
Margaret Anderson Kelliher.
Well, I think we have to look at this issue very seriously. I'm a fan. I've been a Vikings fan all of my life. I don't want to see them leave Minnesota, Gary, and I don't think a lot of Minnesotans want to see them leave. But first and foremost, we must balance our budget, and we must do it in a balanced approach, and that's going to be the #1 priority. We must also start down the path of that new school funding so that our kids have what they need. We need to make sure people have what they need in health care, and we're going to make sure that this is a jobs budget first. After that, I think it's important to entertain this idea. I would not use any general fund tax dollars in a Vikings stadium, and I think it's important for us to really find the solution that has some form of a partnership. Now, I was right there as we did do the Twins Stadium, and what we needed to do is we needed to get community benefits out of that. We needed to get libraries open longer. We needed to do things for the community, and if we can find that balance, that there is community benefits and we are able to use non-general fund tax dollars to do it and create thousands of jobs across the state again and put people back to work who've been sitting on the bench, I think that's an important goal.
Now, we also want to have the candidates ask each other some questions. That's usually pretty entertaining. And we have 2 rounds planned, and we might as well get started with round number 1. Mark Dayton, your question for Matt Entenza, please.
Representative Entenza, you favor scrapping No Child Left Behind. What new education initiatives or innovations do you recommend Minnesota put in place of that?
Well, Mark, thank you very much for the question. First of all, I'm not scrapping No Child Left Behind just because I don't like George Bush, even though that was a George Bush initiative. But it has been disastrous for our public schools. It has led to a dumbing down of our curriculum. We are losing the richness of it, the art, the music, the other important areas. And teachers are telling us that they're spending so much time prepping kids to take tests that instead of teaching to a high level and actually dealing with the achievement gap, that we're drilling down into the recesses of just a couple of areas, and that's not the way we want to go forward. That's why I'm proud that I was endorsed by Insight News, the African-American newspaper from the North Side, recognizing that I really care about the achievement gap, and that's why I have so much support from communities of color around the state. We need, Mark, for example, to have a true mentorship program for teachers. We lose half in their first 5 years from their schools that they're starting, and that is outrageous. Maybe McDonald's can plan on losing half their workers right away, but we can't do that with schools. Minnesota State University Mankato is a great model for that. We need a clearinghouse of best practices on the web. Teachers right now who are overwhelmed, who need to find out the best ways to do things, should be able to go to the Department of Education website and find the lessons that work. And mostly we need to promote public schools and not beat public schools up. We've had way too much of that, and that will end under my administration.
Matt Entenza, your question for Margaret Anderson Kelliher, please.
Well, Margaret, one of the issues that you and I both discussed is a balanced approach to closing the deficit. And you have made additional commitments above the $6 billion deficit. Additional funding for education, additional funding for early childhood education, and in a whole variety of other areas. Could you indicate to us what else, in order to achieve that, you would cut if other economic growth doesn't appear, or what other taxes you would raise?
Well, first of all, Matt, thanks for the question. What we need to be doing is focusing on jobs in the state of Minnesota, and my budget will be a jobs budget first. It's going to be a budget that focuses on making sure that we're creating jobs across the state, we're retaining jobs across the state, and to be able to do that, you have to make these investments. We can't afford not to make these investments. I don't think the current school funding is working in the state of Minnesota. I don't think anyone listening or sitting in this audience thinks it's working well. So we need to scrap it, and we need to come up, and I have a plan to fund schools in a fair, equitable, and stable way over the next 6 years, and I will make that first commitment in my first budget. We will be able to do that, and it's going to relieve property taxes as well by $600 million. It's important to do that right now. Now, I will tell you that I have a full out on my website, margaretforgovernor.com, a full balanced budget proposal. It starts with 40% in revenue, 30% in cuts and savings, and 30% with some temporary measures. That is how we're going to balance this budget, and it's going to be first focused on jobs.
Margaret Anderson Kelliher, your question for Mark Dayton, please.
Well, Mark, I really appreciate all of your service, and I think that I really appreciate all the discussion that we've had. And when you talk about millionaires paying more, I agree with you. They should pay more in taxes. That's an important value in Minnesota, that people are paying taxes fairly. But again, what do we say to the police officer married to the nurse who is going to pay more under your plan? And we're going to become the highest tax rate state in the country, higher than Hawaii. How do you answer that in a time of recession when families are really hurting and feeling the pinch of the $3 billion that Tim Pawlenty and Tom Emmer have put on them in property taxes?
Well, it's simply not true, Margaret.
The $3 billion or the...
According to the state of Minnesota, the average police officer makes about $51,000 a year. The average nurse makes about $73,000 a year. If you add those two together, that's $124,000 of combined income. My tax increase would begin with taxable income of $150,000. That's, if you assume 15% deductions, that's a total income of household income of about $173,000. Now, obviously, $124,000 is well below $173,000. They wouldn't pay any additional income taxes under my proposal. You know, but the trade-off is, again, is if you don't make the richest Minnesotans pay their fair share, people above $173,000 in family income or $150,000 an individual, if they aren't starting to pay more, if the CEO of United Healthcare is making over $100 million, is not paying signitically more taxes, then
well, you
schools,
and I agree on that, that's for sure.
Well, good. We have common ground there. So, you know, that's the trade-off. Then other people are going to suffer.
We have another round of questions. Should we get some more audience questions, and we'll get back to round two here. Nancy?
Gary, I'm here with John from Brainerd, and he's a Margaret Anderson Kelliher supporter.
This is a question for all candidates, and over the last 8 years, I believe the citizens of Minnesota have been looking for a governor that will work with the legislature along, with the executive branch. So my question to each of you is, please be specific on how you will work with the legislative branch to move the issues forward again and move the state of Minnesota forward.
Mark Dayton.
Representative, thank you for your service. And I had the opportunity to serve for 9 years in the executive branch of state government. I'm the only person here who's running for governor now who's ever led a state agency, and I've led 3 of them. And when I worked for Rudy Perpich twice as his Commissioner of Economic Development, I learned from him that you work with the legislature in a cooperative, constructive way. And I would tell every commissioner what he told us, any commissioner who's not at the legislature when the legislature's in session is in the wrong place. And we'll be working cooperatively and collaboratively, as I also did when I was state auditor, responsible for my own agency, working with legislators on both sides of the aisle, as I did when I was a United States Senator, which enabled me in my last year in the Senate to get, with Senator John McCain of Arizona and other Republicans, the first congressional funding for Beyond the Yellow Ribbon, providing services to returning Iraq and Afghan war veterans, the heroes that have served our country and their families, to provide supportive services. That's now a national model, and that's what I had to do if I'm governor.
Margaret Anderson Kelliher.
Well, I have a track record, Gary, of working with both sides of the aisle, working with legislators, both the House and the Senate, in my role as Speaker of the House, being elected Speaker 4 years ago, and being able to do some pretty big things in the state of Minnesota. First of all, standing up to Governor Pawlenty time and time again. And let's just start with that transportation override. What we had to do to get that passed was making sure that we were focused on the task at hand, and that was being able to build a coalition. I built a coalition of Democrats and Republicans, of business and labor to get the job done, of environmentalists and farmers to get the job done. And I will do that time and time again. I have a track record of when things get hard, I keep going. I learned that on the family farm I grew up on. You don't quit until the work is done. And that's what I've done. Transportation, legacy amendment, the renewable energy standard, being able to time and time again bring people together. I think that it's telling that so many legislators, on receiving the DFL endorsement and before, when I earned that endorsement of thousands of Minnesotans, the number of legislators supporting are not just Democrats, but they are also former Republicans and independents. And I think that is telling about the type of leadership I will provide as governor. I won't quit, I won't stop, I'll work through the hard stuff, and we'll get a lot done for Minnesota.
Matt Entenza.
Gary, I'm impressed. You raised your finger and things stopped. That's quite. Now that's the power of a guy from public radio.
Now, make sure you indicate which finger I've raised, please. This will not go over well on radio.
Gary, this is a family show. I'm not going to tell him which finger you raised to the audience, but Gary was smiling while he did it. So, the balance is important to get because you have to be a leader and you have to stand up. So when it comes to scrapping No Child Left Behind, I know that there's some folks out there who want to stick with the status quo, but it's not working. And you have to be prepared to say, the emperor has no clothes, and this is not working, and it must end. And so I will scrap No Child Left Behind because it is costing our schools more than any federal funding that we might lose. And I don't believe we'd lose any, but even if we did, it's costing us more than we might lose. That is the kind of leadership we need. But let me tell you this, in 2005, when we were in the midst of a government shutdown, forced by Tim Pawlenty, whose radical politics of only cutting had pushed us to the brink, I had Republican legislators coming to me and saying, Matt, we know you're willing to talk. We know that you're willing to compromise, but the governor has put his feet in concrete. He signed a pledge to Gary, what I call the We're Too Good to Be Taxpayers League, and as a result, he was unwilling to compromise. And they came to me and said, can you just push a little harder? Can you try and make things work? And that's why I'm pleased to have Dave Jennings, former Republican Speaker of the House from Truman, Minnesota, supporting me because he's moved to the center and he knows that I should be there, as well as so many former Ventura commissioners who are saying, Matt, you're a guy who can bring us together and make things happen.
Back to the audience. Curtis Gilbert.
Yes, Gary, I'm here with Dan. He's a DFL voter from Northfield, but he hasn't decided which of these candidates he's going to support in Tuesday's primary, and so he's got a question for all 3 of them.
With Tom Emmer's campaign imploding by the hour, the candidacy of Tom Horner looks as though it's going to be the team to beat. Which of you have the best plan and the message to defeat Horner, and why is your message better?
Let's see. I think Margaret Anderson Kelliher, you start with this one.
Well, I think that's a great question. I think that it's a long time to November, so we can't get complacent here. I've been the person who's taken on Tom Emmer. I've served the longest with him. I know his tricks and I know his buttons, and I think that's an important thing. Who can beat Tom Emmer? The DFLers were correct in April when thousands of DFLers chose me to be the DFL-endorsed candidate to run against and beat Tom Emmer in November. But it's also important that they were thinking about Tom Horner, and it's clear in the polling that's out there that they were thinking about Tom Horner as well. I'm the first DFL candidate who can actually attract independents and be able to hold DFLers in our camp. That's going to be necessary to win, to beat Tom Horner, and to beat Tom Emmer. I can do that, and I can do that because when you look at the strength of these endorsements and the collaborative style that I will provide, that attracts independent voters. I have a lot of experience with that, being the Speaker of the House. We won those big majorities, 85 and 87. I became the Speaker because people could attract independent voters as DFL candidates. I can do that as the governor candidate as well as the DFL-endorsed candidate.
Matt Entenza.
Thank you, Gary. Let me take you back to 2002. In 2002, not only did we lose my friend Paul Wellstone, who was my first boss out of college, but the Democrats suffered a disastrous defeat with Norm Coleman winning the U.S. Senate race, but Democrats in the State House where I was serving losing 11 seats and going into a 28-seat minority and almost losing control of the state Senate. And the pundits said the DFL is dead. The pundits said we're not going to recover for years. And a week later, I was elected leader of the Democrats, and I took over. I inherited a huge financial debt of the caucus and a hard time even recruiting candidates to run because they said, what's the likelihood we'll ever win? But you know what? We refocused, and we said we're going to focus in a way that Democrats who've been a little ADD at times haven't done. We're going to talk about education. We're going to talk about job growth. We're not going to talk about 20 things. We're going to focus, as I've done in this campaign. And in 2004, when the pundits were saying the Democrats might only win a few seats, you know what? We won 14 seats and only lost one and came within a hair's breadth of making me the Speaker of the House, and that led to our ability in 2005 to take on Tim Pawlenty and win. And in the same way, we will create the same coordinated message that is centrist, that people understand is going to work with the ability to refocus on education and on job creation and get Minnesota back again, and that's how we'll beat Tom Horner and Tom Emmer.
Mark Dayton.
I'm the only one who's ever won a statewide election, and I won the last one in 2000 right in the aftermath of Jesse Ventura's success in '98. So we had a strong Independence Party candidate, and I was running against a conservative Republican, much as we'll be running against Tom Emmer. And I pointed out that a vote for an Independence Party candidate is a vote for the conservative Republican. You know, we have, with all due respect to Mr. Horner, someone who's been endorsed now by former U.S. Senator Dave Durnberger, certainly a Republican, who's very Republican in his views, who once we learn his client list, interesting the question about the Vikings before, he won't make that disclosure, but we'll find, I think, that he's been involved representing a number of special interests in Minnesota who have very significant agendas before the Minnesota legislature. And if people want somebody who's spent his career representing special interests, or they want somebody who's going to spend his next 4 years, like Representative Ember, representing the extreme right wing of our state, or they want somebody who's going to represent the people of Minnesota, and I'm that candidate.
Quick one on health care, and then I want to have you folks ask your second round of questions. Should the state move to a single-payer health care system? Matt Entenza.
You know, I understand the value that people want, but I don't believe when you have a $6 billion deficit that then you can also say the state's going to take over the entire healthcare system with the billions and billions of dollars of costs. So I believe that we should immediately take the federal money that's on the table, $1.4 billion. We could add 100,000 people immediately to coverage. We should expand access to Minnesota Care. And then we should allow small businesses and other folks to buy into our own state health care systems like Minnesota Care so that they can get the discounted group rates that are denied them now by the insurance companies. I think short term we can move quickly to universal health care, and then long term as the federal plan completely reveals itself, we can figure out what is the best approach. But I believe we can get to universal care, we can do it in a cost-effective way without having to raise billions and billions of dollars of taxes at a time when we're struggling to balance the budget.
Mark Dayton.
Gary, let me tell you why we need something different. Because I was in Laverne just the other day, going to all four corners of Minnesota, and a woman about late 50s, and told me she and her husband each pay $7,200 for health insurance. So they're paying over $14,000 a year for health insurance. But they have to pay the first $10,000 apiece for health care. So even with health insurance, which is unaffordable for them, health care is unaffordable for them. And part of that is because these health care giants are reporting these huge profits by not paying for health care for people, or overcharging for their insurance policies. And when they pay 82 cents a dollar for health care, and Medicare, far from perfect, pays 97 cents out of every dollar for health care. That difference is the reason why health insurance and health care is unaffordable. So that's why I favored a national single-payer program. Obviously, we're not going to get that with the special interest influence in Washington. It's one of the reasons I want to come back to Minnesota and be a chief executive to make a difference here. I'll work toward that system here in Minnesota, one step at a time, because otherwise Minnesotans are simply not going to be able to afford health care.
Margaret Anderson Kelliher.
Well, Gary, you meet a lot of people during a campaign. And I have met the siblings of Laura Klinkhammer during this campaign. Laura was someone who had a good paying job, and she lost her job. And with it, she lost her health care. When Laura lost her health care, she became increasingly sick, but she was scared. She was scared on taking on additional debt. She was worried about going to the doctor. One day, she finally saw her family, and they said, Laura, you have to go to the doctor. You don't look well today. She went, but Gary, it was too late. 48 hours later, Laura Klinkhammer died in Minnesota because she didn't have health care. Now, I will tell you that's why I have passion about this issue. We need to cover all Minnesotans with health care by the end of 4 years. I will make that commitment to Minnesotans today by using the tools that are coming from the federal government, making sure we're getting our federal tax dollars back into the state, the $1.4 billion. I'll raise my hand, take the oath of office. This is what we were fighting for at the end of session, and then sign the executive order to bring those dollars home, covering more Minnesotans. But we also have to be committed to the Minnesota Health Plan. All Minnesotans should have health care. No one should die in Minnesota because they don't have health care.
Okay. Matt Entenza, please. Matt Entenza, your question for Mark Dayton, please.
Mark, as you know, for the last year and a half, I have talked again and again and again about the fact that we have to have a focused strategy for job creation, and that I believe that one of the best ways that we can immediately create 50,000 jobs, create a new manufacturing base in wind and in solar and in the next generations of biomass, is to commit ourselves to clean energy. Because we don't have hydrocarbons in Minnesota. We don't have oil and natural gas. Because our addiction to a hydrocarbon economy is putting us into wars that we shouldn't be in. Wouldn't you agree that a top priority that Minnesota should have would be to immediately go to the clean energy economy and make that a top priority for our economic development?
I absolutely do agree with you, and I commend you for the initiatives you presented in your campaign on this important area. And like you probably have been to the University of Minnesota Morris and seen what they're doing there, where they're retrofitted the buildings, which means you're putting people to work at the building trades for more efficient energy use. They retrofitted the heating and cooling system. They're buying agricultural residue of corn stalks primarily from area farmers, putting money in the local economy rather than, you said, sheiks over in the Middle East. And they're going to pelletize that and use a gasifier to save about $1 million for the taxpayers, and that money, I believe, should be recycled through a revolving loan fund in the state, and let's replicate that in every state college and university building, every state government building, every local government building, every school building in Minnesota. Over the decade, we could transform the energy use in Minnesota, save taxpayers millions of dollars, create jobs in the building trades by those projects, and we could make Minnesota, as you said, the energy industry, alternative energy industry for our country.
Margaret Anderson Kelliher, you have a question for Matt Entenza, please.
I do. Well, Matt, I think that we have talked a lot about how to balance this budget and what the right approach is, and that's a very important topic to Minnesotans right now. And so I just want to ask you, can we really go from being the no new taxes state to the all new taxes state, becoming the highest tax state in the country, and really in this time of recession, really putting more of a burden on Minnesotans? I'm wondering what you think about that.
I think that's a question you just asked Mark Dayton about his tax plan, but...
Well, I'm curious what you think, my friend.
And as you know, Margaret, and I've raised it several times in this debate, I have a balanced approach. I believe that those of us who have been fortunate, who make more than $250,000 a year, should pay more. I believe we should peg it at the rate it was in 1998. But I got 34 seconds left. I'll defer to Mark and let him defend his plan if Gary will let him do it, because I think that's the real target of your question.
Well, in fact, if you take the National Tax Foundation that Governor Plenty cites, we are now ranked 9th among the states in state and local taxes. If you added $2 billion a year, my proposal to make the richest Minnesotans pay $2 billion a year in the taxes, you would go from 9th highest to 7th highest states among the nation. We would not be the highest tax state, and we'd have progressive taxes in Minnesota, which is a fundamental democratic principle.
Mark Dayton, do you have a question for Margaret Anderson Kelliher?
Speaker Kelliher, I was surprised, maybe you were at the Farm Fest the other day, that Representative Emmer did not tell the crowd that he opposed the legacy amendment to protect our water resources, enhance our natural environment, fund the arts around the state. I wonder if you could enlighten our audience about what Representative Emmer's role was in opposing that amendment on the House floor.
Well, you know, I think that this is such an interesting question because there were several things that Representative Emmer didn't tell the crowd at Farm Fest last week, right? And, you know, I think I helped illuminate that by telling people, and this is what I will keep doing on the campaign trail. This is why DFLers chose me to be the DFL endorsed candidate, because I'm going to be straightforward and honest with people about what is going on and what Tom Emmer's record has been. Tom Emmer, time and time again, has been opposing things that Minnesotans support, that Minnesotans even voted for, right, in the state of Minnesota, like the legacy amendment. And sometimes it's been, Senator Dayton, that he just opposes it. He stands up and he talks about things that are out of touch and out of step with Minnesotans. Other times he just misses votes. And I don't think that's the role of representative democracy. You know, if you're going to take on a job, you don't quit, you don't stop, you got to stay there and be there and do the job. And I think that's why DFLers chose me to be the DFL endorsed candidate. They know I'm going to show up and do the job.
Okay. Let's go back to the balcony. Molly Bloom.
Hi, I'm here with Jeremy from St. Paul.
Hi, I have a question for all three candidates. Despite being a progressive state, Minnesota hasn't put a Democrat in the governor's office for the last 24 years, since 1986. What has the DFL done wrong in that time, and what's going to be different this time?
I think, Mark Dayton, you go first on this one.
Well, it's been 20 years that we have not had a governor in the governor's office, but I agree with you, that's far too long. You know, I've won statewide elections by running as a Democrat, unabashedly. You know, as Paul Wellstone said, from the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party. The principles I believe in, principles I believed in all my life, that I fought for all my life, and that I will continue to stand for all my life. And they've been winning principles. Fair taxes, that the people who are most fortunate in this state should pay their fair share of taxes. And I'll be the one person who will make taxes progressive in Minnesota again. And the reason to do that is to solve the budget crisis and to put that money first and foremost into education. You know, when over 80% of our budget goes for education, health care, and human services, I mean, I just have to shake my head when people say here, or certainly Representative Emmer especially, that they are not going to raise taxes, but they're not going to cut any spending that's going to make any adverse difference in anybody's life. I just find that incredulous given the realities of our budget situation. And I'll put that money to work for Minnesota, and that's why I think people will support me once again.
Margaret Anderson Kelliher.
Well, I think this is about both winning the election and being able to govern, and they can be a little bit different things. So let me tell you what we've been doing already. We have already built a statewide grassroots campaign, and I'm so proud to have the endorsement of David Wellstone in this campaign. I am proud to have our campaign compared to Paul Wellstone and Hubert Humphrey's grassroots efforts in the Star Tribune editorial, and they know this because they have seen what we are doing. We are bringing people together all across the state. That's how we win elections in Minnesota. That's how we do it. We bring people together from all different areas, from all different backgrounds, to be able to win the election and then be able to govern progressively. And I agree with you. You know what? We need to make taxes fair and progressive in the state of Minnesota. It's a hallmark of my campaign. In fact, for the last 4 years as Speaker of the House, that's exactly what we've been doing. If any one of the budgets that the legislature had proposed and passed had passed with Governor Pawlenty's signature, do you know that we wouldn't be short-term borrowing right now? Do you know that we would not be in this fiscal mess right now? I have been out there proposing, doing, and delivering on this, and you need a governor who's going to deliver for you. I will do that, and we will win.
Matt Entenza.
I think the question is one that Democrats really need to ponder, because the record of futility is great, and the cost to our state has been huge. When I go down to Grand Meadow, Minnesota, and I spoke to the high school classes down there, and they told me they have no language teachers anymore. And so when the kids in Grand Meadow High School want to apply to the University of Minnesota, they can't make the basic standards except as remedial students. That is the cost not only of leadership that believes cutting is the way forward, but of failed Democratic campaigns. And that's why I think you only have to look at the campaign that I put together in 2004, when I was brought in to take a DFL House caucus that was broken, that was 28 seats in the minority, and we refocused. We refocused and said, we're not going to be the Democrats were for 50 things, where the public isn't sure they trust them because we sound too often like we will do anything for any constituency. And instead, we showed passion and commitment to the things that made Minnesota great. That is education. That's what made a poor kid like me from Worthington have an opportunity, and it means job creation. You do those things well, the other things will follow. And that is what we need to talk about. We need to be focused, we need to be clear. And Gary, I want to give a shout out to the folks that are listening and my volunteers in call rooms all over the state right now. We asked them to not come down here tonight, but instead to be calling for votes, and I want to thank them for the work they're doing right now.
Okay. We've only got about 2 minutes to go here before we get to the closing statements. A real quick question. I'm going to ask you to 15, 20-second response, so that's not fair, but anyway, go ahead. Nancy?
This is Elizabeth from Golden Valley. She's undecided.
The current economic downfall could very well be the beginning of the new economy where less is more. How will you generate a thriving Minnesota in this new economy? Specifically, where will these new jobs come from?
Well, that's an easy question to answer in 20 seconds. Quick overview, Margaret Anderson Kelliher, very quickly.
I put out a jobs plan 6 months ago. It's the most comprehensive jobs plan because it's going to take jobs in every single area. It's going to take jobs in the clean energy economy. It's going to take jobs in knowledge work. It's going to take jobs in manufacturing. And I have the track record to be able to work with business, because I've done it before, to be able to deliver on these jobs. We need to invest in small businesses. And I'm going to stop there. You can go to my website, margaretforgovernor.com, and take a look at the plan. It's a good plan. It's going to put Minnesotans back to work.
Matt Entenza.
Gary, we have to have focus. The reality is we can't have 30, 40, 50-point jobs plans. We have to work on a number of fronts. But you know what? Getting the new clean energy economy is not something that can just be one little box we check off. It's going to be hard work, moving the utilities, fighting off the big oil companies, fighting off the big coal companies, and our own addiction to oil, which is killing us. It's killing our environment. It is hurting our economy as our money flies out of the state. And so I will focus, because it is focus that will bring us the 50,000 jobs we can get right away and create the new industries we must have to move us into the future.
Mark Dayton.
In 15 seconds, invest in early childhood education, invest in K-12 education, invest in higher education. If we create the best education systems in the world, we'll have the best possible future for all of our citizens.
Here's a real quick one. Yes or no, if you don't win on Tuesday, will you actively support whoever does win? Matt Entenza?
Absolutely. I told that to both of them months and months ago.
Mark Dayton?
Yes, absolutely, and with pleasure.
Absolutely.
All right, time for some closing statements from the candidates. 1 minute each. 1 minute each. The candidates drew straws. Mark Dayton goes first.
This election is about your future and the future of our state. You deserve a governor who works hard for you and for a better Minnesota for all of us. And I will be that governor. A governor who solves the state budget crisis fairly by asking the richest Minnesotans to pay their fair share of taxes, to protect essential public services and hardworking public employees. A governor who provides every child and young adult in Minnesota with the best possible education to succeed in this global economy. A governor who lowers property taxes for senior citizens, homeowners, farmers, and small business owners. A governor who invests in new industries and the jobs they will provide for unemployed Minnesotans. And in affordable health care for everyone. More than any other candidate, I will lead Minnesota in a new direction. A better Minnesota for you and for all of us. And I ask you for your support this Tuesday.
Dayton. And next up, Matt Entenza.
Gary, as you can see, I'm sitting here, no notes in front of me. I'm just going to speak directly from the heart. I owe everything I've ever had to this state. and to the community that I came from Worthington, Minnesota. I lost my dad when I was 15, who sadly had the disease of alcoholism, and he walked out the door one day. And the bank took away the house, and we didn't have health care for a couple of years. And I remember what it was like to be sick and to have my mom say, I don't know what we're going to do. But I came from a great town that believed that even a poor kid with an obscure name like Entenza deserved an opportunity, and I got that opportunity. But those opportunities have been taken away. They've been taken away from the kids in my hometown. I watch our small town shrinking because there's a governor who's not there trying to grow jobs. I walk down Broadway Avenue in North Minneapolis, and I see an African-American community where 1 out of 3 homes is in foreclosure. We need a governor who gets it, a governor who is going to refocus. Education's the way forward, and we're going to scrap No Child Left Behind and refocus on education. We're going to make sure that Minnesota is great again, and I hope I can get your vote on Tuesday.
That's Matt Entenza. And finally, Margaret Anderson Kelliher.
Well, Gary, I've been all over this state, and I've been meeting with families just like mine, from the miner in Virginia to the teacher in Mankato. And Minnesotans are worried about the very same things. They're worried about how to pay the bills, and how to pay the mortgage, and how to send our kids to college. And that's why who we choose to be the next governor is more important than ever before. It has been 24 years since we have gone without a DFL governor. We need a governor who's going to do every single possible thing to make sure that Minnesotans go back to work. We need a governor who's going to fight for our senior citizens, who's going to fight for our kids. I am going to be that person who is that fearless governor who's going to fight on behalf of Minnesotans. I will be that governor. We need to make sure that when thousands of Minnesotans endorsed me to be their DFL endorsed candidate, they know that I will beat Tom Emmer in November. I will never stop fighting. I will never give up. Minnesota is worth fighting for. I ask for your support. I want to be your governor. I want to be a great governor for this state. I ask for your vote on Tuesday, August 10th.
Those are the 3 DFL candidates for governor, and that's all the time we have this evening. Thanks, candidates, for coming out tonight, and good luck on Tuesday. Polls open 7 o'clock Tuesday morning, open until 8 Tuesday night. Then we'll be on the air Tuesday night with complete election night coverage here on Minnesota Public Radio News. Those of you here at the Fitzgerald Theater, thanks for coming out tonight. Been a great audience, very polite, enthusiastic. Those of you listening on the radio or the web, I'm sure you've been just as polite and just as enthusiastic, and thanks for tuning in. In case you missed part of tonight's debate, we'll rebroadcast it at noon tomorrow on midday. Also at 11 tomorrow on midday, the 2 leading Independence Party candidates, Tom Horner, Rob Hahn, will be in our studios for one final debate. Sarah Meyer is the producer of our election coverage. Julie Seipel is our assistant producer with help from Andy Fisher. Mike Handlers, Nancy Liebens, Curtis Gilbert, and Molly Bloom. Rob Byers and Eric Strong. Good evening from the Fitzgerald Theater in downtown St. Paul.